All right, welcome back, everybody. Before we get into our trending topics and taking a look at what's happening on social media, let's focus our attention onto this. A Judicial Conduct Tribunal has unanimously found that Western Cape Judge President Hlophe improperly attempted to influence two judges of the Constitutional Court, 13 years after the surfacing of the allegations. The report has now been submitted to the Judicial Services Commission, which is expected to meet later today to determine Hlophe's fate. The complaint against Hlophe was lodged by 11 Constitutional Court judges after Judges Bess, Nkabinde and Jafta complained that he had improperly attempted to influence the outcome of a matter in favour of former President Jacob Zuma. Someone who's been following this story since I can remember, since it began, is legal journalist Karyn Maughan. Good to have you, Karyn. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
13 years this has been going on. The matter since 2008. Why? Why is something like this taken so long to get to this point?
Well, it was interesting that you raised that, Leanne, because when Judge Jacques and his panel handed down that report, it was, ventilated to the media and the public on Saturday evening. One of the topics was the inordinate delay in the finalization of this matter. Back when the complaint was first lodged, the JSC actually decided that there wasn't a complaint that justified potential investigation for impeachable offences, and the matter was essentially dismissed. Subsequently, there were a range of successful legal challenges brought against that decision and its outcome. Of course, Judge Hlophe also part of those challenges. There were cases brought by Bess and Nkabinde and Jafta in relation to the new setup under which the JSC pursued conduct tribunals. And then there was a dispute over the payment of Judge President Hlophe's legal fees, which dragged on for the last 2 years or so. But really quite a profound indictment of the Judicial Service Commission and its apparent reluctance or inability to take action against judges accused of the most serious offences. This morning's meeting of the JSC, which starts at 9 a.m., really the beginning of a potential new chapter for the Commission in showing that it is indeed serious about this and won't waive or step away from the fact that it may need or should ask President Cyril Ramaphosa to suspend Hlophe prior to impeachment proceedings potentially kicking off in the National Assembly.
How long can this take? Because at the end of the day, when we waited 13 years to get to this point, I know it sounds like, okay, it's going to sit this morning and then, we hope that things move faster. But in reality, could this drag on for just as long?
Well, it's not without the bounds of possibility, and given the history of this matter, that Judge President Hlophe brings some form of legal challenge to that tribunal report. I think everyone is expecting something of that nature. Of course, he hasn't made any comment about this. But of course, the decision now for the JSC is, do we endorse this report of the tribunal? Do we find that there are indeed grounds for impeachment? If we do so, do we then go to President Ramaphosa and say you need to suspend Hlophe prior to the impeachment proceedings getting underway in the National Assembly? Of course, then there needs to be a 2/3 majority vote. But from the JSC side, they must move and make a decision this week. There's absolutely no reason why this needs to be delayed in any way, shape or form. The report is there. The real question mark will be about potential legal action. But even if that is the case, they have the ability now to make a decision with regards to this report and whether in fact they will support it.
Now, the tribunal said Hlophe's conduct seriously threatened and interfered with the independence, impartiality, dignity, effectiveness, all the words, really, that we relate to the Constitutional Court. And this, of course, thereby threatens public confidence. And no outsider not involved should approach judges on a pending case. Hlophe did put a fight, arguing that there is nothing wrong with him approaching other judges on a matter of law. Let's discuss this, or the merits of both arguments, because under certain circumstances, it is really not a crime to do so, but perhaps you could inform us on this one.
Well, basically what the tribunal said was that, if I'm a judge and I am looking at a particular issue and I know that you happen to be an expert on something, I can approach you and say, Leanne, I would like to hear your insights on this particular issue. In the Zuma matter, of course, it was this issue around legal privilege, which was a massive form of or mechanism of contestation in that case, because the actual case involved the warrants, the search and seizure warrants used by the then Scorpions unit, to go and seize 93,000 pages of documentation, which are now being used as evidence against Jacob Zuma in his pending corruption trial, which is intended to start in May. And essentially, one of the arguments was that there were 2 boxes of documents that were taken from the offices of Zuma's lawyer, Michael Hulley, which were financial documents. And there was an argument advanced that because this was in his lawyer's office, that this potentially, could have legal privilege attached to it. In other words, couldn't be used as evidence, and the whole, search and seizure operation was tainted by that. Now, in the SCA, there was a 3-2 split. 2 of the judges in that court said, yes, we believe this privilege issue is important. We don't think these warrants should stand. 3 of them said, no, the warrants stood. So when Hlophe approached these 2 judges, he said on his own evidence that he was very consumed by this issue of legal privilege, and he wanted to discuss it with them in an academic way because it had all these repercussions. Of course, we don't, there's no evidence that the Judge President ever, in fact, wrote any kind of form of judgment on legal privilege. So he certainly wasn't an expert on that area in any way, shape, or form. And he then approaches Justice Chris Jafta, who is his friend, and tries to have this conversation with him. Jafta then warns Bess and Nkabinde, who was writing the note for the Constitutional Court on this issue of privilege and has no relationship to Judge President Hlophe. And in his approach to her, says a number of things, including that, he has a list of names from intelligence of people who benefited from the arms deal and are going to lose their jobs when Jacob Zuma becomes president. And he also says there's no case against Jacob Zuma, and tries to talk to her about this legal privilege issue, and she shuts him down. Now, what the tribunal has said is, first of all, this wasn't a case where you were simply discussing the principles of legal privilege. You were trying to talk about the merits of the case against Jacob Zuma. And any lawyer, any judge, anyone will tell you that just does not happen. It's completely, utterly inappropriate, ethically, legally, everything.
Yeah.
Second of all, you weren't asked to provide your input on this. And it's only in circumstances when judges ask you for their input that it's really appropriate for you to do so.
I mean, yeah, it's a very interesting one. It really is. But I just want to get back to the events that are going to happen today, and then get your views on this. So you mentioned earlier that members of the Judicial Services Commission are meeting today. Is there a possibility that they could actually arrive at a different conclusion?
Very much so, Leanne. Remember with the Judge Nkula Matata case, the so-called drunk judge case where, he rode his car into a wall and hurling him. I think it was in 2007, and he was very drunk and made a number of utterances towards the owner of that home, including, calling him a boor and various other things. There was a finding of gross misconduct in that matter, but the JSC actually decided not to push for his impeachment. They instead found that he was, guilty of a far lesser offence and essentially ordered that he pay a fine of over R1 million, which he did. That, of course, is now being challenged in the courts at the moment. But there is a very distinct possibility that the JSC, decides that no, we don't agree with this tribunal, and we think that Hlophe should be found guilty of a lesser offence and be allowed to remain in office and not be impeached and retain his judicial benefits.
So now, as we know, the next step, the matter will be referred to Parliament, and then there's even a possibility of an impeachment. But, in reality, let's look at an impeachment for Judge Hlophe. I mean, and his career. He is 62 years old at this time, and we don't know how much longer this is going to go on. If, in fact, this does work out, I mean, is this punishment enough for him?
Yes. I mean, impeachment is an immensely serious thing. There is no, ongoing criminal investigation in relation to this matter, as far as I know. But, impeachment is immensely serious. I mean, it strips you of all your judicial benefits. As far as I understand, judges get a salary for life. I mean, that's a huge thing to lose. In terms of his reputation, he will be the first judge in democratic South African history to ever be impeached in this manner. This is someone who is the most powerful judge in the Western Cape, who has, hold sway over that court for over a decade. So, I mean, the kind of implications of it for him are immense. And I would be shocked, Leanne, if there isn't some kind of pushback from him, some kind of attempt to challenge this decision, both in a kind of political and legal sense. We know that he's been very outspoken. He's given interviews where he said he should have been the next Chief Justice of the country, that he was targeted by the late Pius Langa and Dikgang Moseneke. All of these utterances, of course, found to be baseless and unsubstantiated and scurrilous by the tribunal. But this is not an individual who is going to go down without a fight.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I was about to add on to your comments. I mean, this man was once tipped to be the Chief Justice of the country, and I mean that is the reality. But on the recent Fanara and Bongo case, the public had very, very strong views, even ahead of the verdict, that Hlophe shouldn't have presided over this particular case due to the allegations of his relationship with Zuma and given the current ANC internal factions, and Bongo seen as part of that Zuma faction. What did you think at that time?
No, he should never have presided over this matter. At the time that he chose to allocated this case to himself, we were awaiting this tribunal report. So, it was kind of, in some ways, could be interpreted as almost a contempt of that process, that, I'm not taking it seriously. He would, of course, say that, well, I knew I'm innocent, I've got nothing to worry about. But he should never have allocated himself that matter, in these circumstances. He shouldn't have been presiding over any case, Leanne. I mean, the last big criminal case, I think, was the Zephany nurse kidnapping matter, which was, I think, in 2016 that he did. So it was completely inappropriate for him to preside over the Bongo matter. The NPA has now applied for leave to appeal, and he will be the person to make a determination on whether they've shown that there is indeed he got it wrong on the law, the application of the Prevention of Organised Crime Act. An appeal should, but there's every possibility, there's going to be a great deal of contention around that matter, because if he turns that appeal down, it's just going to be, further raise questions about the legitimacy of this process. And one person who I think should actually be quite upset over this would be, of course, Bongani Bongo, because, as a consequence, there is a very distinct possibility that if this matter goes to the SCA and the SCA supports what the NPA is saying about these areas of law, he will go on, he will face a potential retrial. And in that matter, that will, of course, cause all further kinds of issues about his rights as an accused person. Mm-hmm. So this entire failure of the JSC to deal timeously with this matter, 13 years. I know. There are children who are walking around that were, it's that age. It's absolutely insane. So, something has to be done, and it needs to be done quickly.
Some people are calling for him to be suspended just based on what we've heard this weekend. Is that fair?
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah. I mean, the bigger picture here as we start wrapping up, and what is at risk for the country in these political cases? I mean, whether you mention the Mdluli case or Magashule, the Guptas, Zuma, I mean, let's focus for a second on the pressure they place on the country's law enforcement. I mean, the NPA, the Hawks, the judiciary. For example, the confusing flip-flopping of the NPA when they had to seize the Gupta's assets and then said they are provisionally withdrawing the order, which was never, ever reinstated. Where does this leave the country?
It's very interesting, Leanne, because literally within 24 hours, we saw the Constitutional Court issue directions to the former President Jacob Zuma to ask him to provide his input on the kind of prison sentence or sanction he should face as a consequence of potentially being found guilty of contempt. And the Con Court this week will get that affidavit if he chooses to file it, and will need to make a decision. If, the kind of statements that he's made about the legitimacy of the judiciary, his failure to honor the subpoenas, his failure to honour the Constitutional Court's ruling, is that serious enough to justify putting him in prison? At the same time, we see the JSC considering this very important matter with Hlophe, and whether or not it's going to support an impeachment process, and whether or not it will recommend to President Cyril Ramaphosa that Hlophe be suspended. And those two cases are going to have massive implications for rule of law, the very issues that you're raising at the moment. If a country, if ordinary citizens believe that the rule of law does not apply to certain people who happen to be powerful, who happen to be judge presidents or former presidents, that you can get away with things if you're important, then that is devastating for the constitutional democracy that we all live in and exist within. Because we all need to obey the law. We all need to recognize the constitutional supremacy of the Constitution. And we need to recognize that when a court gives an order, though we may not agree with it, we have certain avenues to appeal those processes, but at a certain point we do need to comply. And so those decisions now, this week, the rubber is going to hit the road for all of us. And it's a historic moment. And one just has to hope that both the JSC and the Con Court have the discernment and understanding of just how important these decisions are when they make them.
Karyn, before I let you go, one final quick question to you. This report, I mean, we've only spoken particularly on the Bongo case, but do you think this report will have any impact on the judgments that Hlophe has presided over in these past 13 years? I mean, will there be a question mark and basically relook at every single one of these cases?
Unfortunately, it does open up the possibility for that. Because if you say that a judge, doesn't understand that it's not appropriate for him to tell other judges, what he thinks about their rulings and to try and influence them, that, he makes scurrilous attacks against, people who criticize and accuse him, it raises a number of question marks over the legitimacy of his leadership and also over his judicial functioning. At one point I did a story which showed that Judge President Hlophe has been involved in 10 other scandals. He's faced possible impeachment before, in regards to getting money from Oasis as a consultancy agreement, and question marks over whether he declared that. This man, unfortunately, has had his tenure as a judge swathed in scandal and question marks. And because of the length of time taken to resolve this, there is indeed a possibility that people who feel aggrieved by his rulings use what happened here to argue that they didn't get a fair hearing and attempt to potentially challenge those decisions. Whether or not they're successful in that remains to be seen, but it does leave an opening for that kind of thing to happen.
Karyn Maughan, thanks so much for talking to us. Legal journalist Karyn Maughan discussing the implications of the findings of the Judicial Conduct Tribunal, which found that Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe was guilty of gross misconduct. Lots ahead this week on this particular issue. All right, let's quickly take a